start here in a couple of minutes. While we're here, I can just kind of give a background of what we're doing, where we've been, where we're at, where we're going. So this is an insightful dialogue between AI influencers and Dr. Innovators. We started the Dr. Innovator program about 5 years ago called DIUP, Digital Innovation Upskilling Program. And we had certified hundreds of doctors in this DIUP program over the years, working more on the healthcare side with a doctor focus, then coming together with our sister companies, AKT Health. We brought in the life science, pharma, biotech side, and they've kind of intersected now in the middle, as is going on everywhere that we see, even in the physical world, with healthcare institutions working closely with life science and pharma companies. So this past year, we began offering the AI influencers and Dr. Innovator dialogue. We call it insightful dialogue because we wanted a little bit different format. We wanted those using the experts sharing their real life experiences. So we're right at 8 a.m. here on the East Coast. So we will begin with our keynote speaker. I'd like to introduce principal data scientist and AI and analytics expert, Dr. Elias Abou Zeid from Novo Nordisk, 12 plus years experience in digital health and AI innovation. Dr. Zeid leads biomarker analytics to advance patient outcomes and healthcare innovation. He's a former associate director of data science at Sanofi, overseeing digital biomarker development, holds a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Toronto and advanced degrees from McGill and Concordia University. He's a prolific author, patent holder, and frequent speaker at healthcare and AI conferences. He's passionate advocate for patient-centric AI solutions, enjoys soccer, hiking, and photography in his free time. Please, Dr. Elias, wearables and AI, real-world patient insights for better drug development.
Thank you, David, for this nice introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, all. It's a pleasure to be here today and to talk about an interesting topic, wearables and AI. I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. Just a second. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great.
Okay,
let's
there
start.
We go. Now it's full. Okay.
Great. So I work in pharma, and one of the big challenges in pharma, and actually before I go ahead, I want to make sure to express this disclaimer that the opinions expressed by myself here are not necessarily reflecting the views of Novo Nordisk. So one of the biggest challenges of pharma is basically the high cost for a new drug development, which is estimated about $2.6 billion, let alone the cost per patient in a phase 3 trials is around $50,000. Yet we see 70% of these phase 3 trials fail, and mostly due to inability to demonstrate the drug efficacy at this stage. Typically, we go through phase 1, phase 2, but down really the longitudinal phase is phase 3, and this is the critical phase. So one of the challenges that actually cause this problem is the fact that the assessments we do for patients in clinic, which has been the gold standard for a long time, are episodic and subjective. Many of those basically suffer from high interdata variability, but also the patient themselves, when they're coming to visit a clinic, cognitively, their behavior is different than the real world life they're living in. And therefore, this is not actually reflecting patient real performance. And that's what we see this big difference in these assessments. However, in the last decade or so, we started looking more at real world data, and this shows to actually better track disease progression and therapy effects. And this is here a good example, a real example from a 1 year patient monitoring in terms of his function, his or her functioning. And as you can see, those red bars reflect actually the conventional in-clinic assessments. And over 1 year, these assessments have been taken every 2 to 3 months. At the end of the year, it's actually hard to understand whether the patient functioning improved, because we can see it's improving and then it's actually declining again. However, when we look at the continuous measurement of this patient functioning, and this was measured here by a wearable device for activity, we can see, although there's a variability from day to day, the overall trend, it's actually improving. And that's what we would be missing if we're just relying on these episodic in-clinic assessment. So this shows us how real-world data and evidence is important, and actually wearable and digital devices can collect continuous and objective real-world data. And that's what we define and is known as digital biomarkers. Officially, one of the good definition I like on digital biomarkers is the one given by the European Medical Agency. It's objective and quantifiable measures of physiology and behavior collected via digital devices. So there's a wide range of wearable and digital devices. Some could measure physical signals like motion, pressure, vibration. Some other can measure thermal signals like patient fever, or other can measure electrophysiological signals like electrocardiogram, muscle movement. And there's a different sort of type of wearables, how we can wear it and whatnot, from smart glasses to smart watches, so on and so forth. But what has been encouraging is actually the adherence of population and accepting more and more the use of wearable devices. And here we can see from 2021 to 2025, the estimate for the US population, we're actually getting an increase in the percentage of population for their adherence in using wearable devices. Now, one might argue, I mean, traditionally we've been using real world data in the form of patient reported outcomes, which has basically has been a standard of care for real world evidence. And this is basically nothing but questionnaires filled by the patients themselves. It can be daily or weekly, but they have huge limitations. First of all, it suffers from subjectivity and a lot of missing data, where, for example, patient, may not be compliant to filling up every day or every week, or even we've seen cases where patient forgets filling it, and then he or she comes back to fill it up, and then they have this bias, recall bias. So the advantage of digital biomarkers is they are objective, continuously monitoring and passively collecting data, so it's not disturbing patients. So in this way, we can see how digital biomarkers can actually augment extensively the patient-reported outcome as another source of real-world evidence. Here we see two examples of comparing digital biomarkers and patient-reported outcomes, where in this study, a cross-sectional analysis of data from the UK Biobank, the correlation between in-clinic measured body fat or adiposity with wearable measured physical activity versus self-reported physical activity. We can see in the case of the wearable measured physical activity, there is a linear relation with the in-clinic measured body fat, whereas for the self-reported physical activity, it actually tends to be overestimated by patient themselves, where we see it's actually nonlinear, and it kind of plateaus here, where for the several measures of or for a given measure of body fat, we see an overestimate in the physical activity, self-reported physical activity. Another example is actually looking at the activity tracking in patients who had undergone hip and knee surgery. And this study was done basically after the surgery. All the patient had worn a um, wearable wristwatch to track physical activity. One cohort, known as the feedback cohort, was receiving feedback from the wearable device about the number of steps they are performing daily. The other group was blinded from such a feedback. Both group actually filled a weekly patient-reported outcome questionnaire about their estimate of their own physical activity. And data showed that actually, as we go after the surgery, the cohort or the group that had access to the feedback about their step counts from the wearable device actually achieved a higher level of activity in terms of step counts as we go further up to the 6 months period. And this clearly show the importance of this feedback from the wearable device as an objective measure of physical activity. All of which to say, digital biomarkers offer important advantages to improve drug developments. First of all, it allows quality of life and real world evidence measure of patients by allowing drug efficacy and safety to be assessed objectively in patients' everyday life. Second, it promotes decentralization, where now much more assessment can happen in patients' own home or everyday life passively, reducing the need for excessive in-clinic visit and therefore reducing patient burden. This automatically lead to improving compliance in clinical trials as well as retention rates of patients. Last but not least, cost reduction. With wearable devices, which are typically low cost compared to excessive cost of in-clinic assessment, we are able to collect much more data in shorter period of time. So that reduce, first of all, the cost of data collection and allow pharma companies to make faster and better decision, for example, in assessing a drug and decide whether to go from a phase 2 to a phase 3 trials. And typically phase 3 trials are much more expensive trials. Now, as you see, and as you might be thinking, I mean, these wearable devices are collecting data continuously. This must be a huge amount of data. And in fact, it is. It is a big type of data. And one can think how we can take advantage of all this huge and big amount of data. And AI has been an instrumental approach to actually transform this big data into meaningful health measures. So here's basically how it typically works. With these wearable and digital devices, we're collecting continuous passive data at home. All this data, it's typically transferred via Bluetooth and wireless to the sponsor or device vendor cloud, where analysis can be performed in the form of signal data processing, but also artificial intelligence like machine learning or even the more advanced deep learning. Even nowadays, we start looking into applying generative AI and large language models. And all this lead to derive important measures that could be like endpoints, for example, sleep measures, physical activity, vital sign like blood pressure, heart rate variability, and even the way a patient is walking or his walking is improved. And all these measures can be validated in a clinical trial to become primary or secondary endpoints. Thus, these are now digital endpoints that can be used later as drug efficacy and safety endpoints. And of course, another form of using this, it can evolve to become a digital therapeutics or software as medical device that can be also used outside of the drug development phase as a companion app for patients. Now we saw how this framework works. Let's walk through a couple of examples. Walking speed estimation is actually one of the important measure specifically in neuromuscular disease like multiple sclerosis and even relevant in patient who undergo surgeries for their knee or any lower limb surgery. Typically, walking speed or gait speed or gait even analysis estimation happens during a clinic visit where patients have to commute to a clinic, and a physician would perform a plethora of assessment, physical activity assessment, and one of the most used one is the 6-minute walk test, where patients are asked to walk for 6 minutes, and then a physician would look at how many steps they were able to perform or how much duration they were able to cover in the 6-minute walk test to actually estimate their walking speed. However, we can actually assess this at home or in the patient real life by using a wearable device. For example, a accelerometry based device like the one shown in the picture, which happened to be worn here on a belt on the waist. And so this device is actually measuring the body three-axis acceleration, the body XYZ acceleration, measuring this raw signal, which is actually a large amount of data. And then these raw signal can be processed through a traditional machine learning approach where we actually look at feature extraction and then applying a model like linear regression with some labeled data, we can train the model to estimate walking speed. Another approach, which actually to use a more advanced deep learning, where now we don't have to extract features but actually feed in the whole raw data and let the model train to optimize finding patterns in this raw data that actually allow us to have an accurate walking speed estimation. And again, here you would need a set of labeled data. So my team and I actually did a work on comparing these two models on slow walking elderly data from the device I showed earlier. And we demonstrated with a deep learning approach, we actually can achieve a better estimate of raw walking speed of patients, both in terms of reducing the estimate error and aligning into the basically estimating the whole range of walking speed. And so with this deep learning model, we showed that it can actually have a better estimate overall of the walking speed. Now, one can say, okay, I mean, deep learning models do perform better, but they need also a large amount of data. And this is actually a curse for clinical trials because collecting labeled data is a complex and costly approach. Yet, there is also another approach in AI that can actually lower dependency on this labeled expensive data. This is what is known as self-supervised learning. How it works, it's basically as follows. We can train a general AI model by using a large set of generic unlabeled data. And here's an example for estimating human activity, which is a very important endpoint in a lot of disease areas when we are developing drug, for example, for myasthenia gravis, where we would like to know how much time of the day a patient is spending being laying down or sitting versus being active or standing. And this approach actually takes a large set of generic unlabeled accelerometry data, which is easy to find. There's a lot of open source data sets, really very inexpensive. We don't need any labels. We're just generally training a model called the encoder here to be like, estimate certain self-supervised tasks. And then we transfer learn this primary model to our specific task. But here we don't need to retrain the encoder. We freeze it and we only train a few layers of deep learning. And usually they only require a small set of labeled data. And like that, I'm actually removing the requirement for this large amount of labeled data, where I still able to achieve actually even better than supervised learning when I have a small amount of labeled data. So this way now, I still have a good performing deep learning model that doesn't require a large amount of data. And this is very beneficial in clinical trials for drug development. In the last 2 years or so, we all heard of generative AI, especially with the introduction of ChatGPT. Generative AI is a type of AI that generates new data based on patterns it learned from existing data. Two popular generative AI are the large language models in ChatGPT and Gemini, and these are actually text-based generative AI interfaces. Here we see a quick example I worked through to actually show you how it works. You can actually prompt a text and then it will actually generate based on your text whatever you're looking for. For example, in this case, I asked a text-based large language model that generates images to generate an image for someone holding a sign saying generative AI. This is, by the way, a free open source website you can play with. It was okay, although it did a mistake in actually spelling generative, but still it's something impressive. Now, how is generative AI being applied to digital health and drug development? And recently there was some work published about what we call health large language model, where we're actually taking a large language model, but now we can input a multimodal data. It can be wearable data, electronic health data, or any type of data about the patient. And all this is entered as text to the large language model. And then the large language model can give you estimate about several health condition of the patient based on this different data sources as input. Here we see an example where actually out of the shelf existing large language model like GPT-3 and 4 were actually tested versus a completely fine-tuned health-specific small model of basically generative AI. And impressively, we could see that actually the existing model can still perform as good as a fine-tuned model, although we haven't fine-tuned those existing large language models. So this is something impressive and encouraging that we could use off-the-shelf model, give it some input about the patient health from multimodal data, and it still can do good prediction. So we talked about digital biomarkers, how AI is helping giving important insights, but how does the success perspective of digital biomarkers look like? It's basically seen in evolving from an exploratory to a primary or secondary endpoint. And again, this is still an emerging and experimental field. However, there has been few successes. One of the earliest and the first success is the European Medical Agency approval of the first ever digital endpoint. And this started in 2019, where EMA approved the first secondary digital endpoint, the stride velocity 95 percentile in Duchenne muscle dystrophy, where actually, after a lot of work, it was demonstrated that this wearable at-home measure actually highly correlate with the in-clinic 6-minute walk test. And further validation of this measure led the EMA in 2023 to approve this measure as the first primary digital endpoint in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. There's a
1
big
minute, please.
advantages. Sure. Yeah, I'm almost done. There's a big advantages of this measure compared to the alternative in clinic 6-minute walk distance. It allows to have continuous monitoring in home settings, and it also know it's highly correlated with a 6-minute walk test, but it's still more sensitive because it's continuous and can detect all the variability. All of which to say in this talk, digital biomarkers can provide objective and continuous real-world patient data for better assessment of drug treatment efficacy or safety. AI can transform big patient digital data into meaningful healthcare measure, and of course, to scale further digital biomarkers in clinical trial and the healthcare sector. And overall, we need more collaboration between device vendors, sponsors, regulatory, and healthcare providers and physicians. This concludes my talk. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elias. That was extremely insightful. We used to say, I think it was 20, 30 years ago, I guess they've been saying it a while, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So I love this. So now we're going to move to our insightful dialogue here with our Dr. Innovators. And then at the end, we will have participants ask their questions. So feel free to put those in the chat for after the insightful dialogue here. So I'll let you read the wonderful backgrounds here of our Dr. Innovators as they go ahead and ask their questions in the interest of time. Dr. Dominic Sofa, please, your questions for Dr. Elias.
Thank you, Professor David, and my appreciations to Dr. Elias for a wonderful presentation, quite insightful, quite educating. Yeah, I have a couple of questions arising from the topic. Indeed, it's evident that wearable medical devices are very, very important and they go a long way in helping in as regards to drug development and other in managing patients generally. However, I am wondering where you practice, are there any regulatory requirements for these wearable medical devices? I ask this question in the light of the fact that, you know, the world is a global village, as is often been said, and with the World Wide Web, the internet, I mean, information can move from throughout the world in a matter of minutes, seconds even. So, and I'm aware that when transfer of data across countries, across continents, sometimes there's requirements, for instance, for like a medical transfer agreement across countries. So I'm thinking, are there any regulatory frameworks that exist surrounding the use of wearable medical devices, especially when it involves data being transferred from one part of the world to another part of the world for processing or for analysis and all that? That's my first question. The second question also
if you want,
related to this.
Maybe Dr. Sofa,
Yes,
can we have Dr. Elias answer the first one and then come back for the follow-up?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I might have missed because the quality of the sound it wasn't good for me. But I think you're asking about whether there is some regulation for these digital biomarkers in terms of
Yes.
data transfer and record protection, whatnot, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And in fact, there is, although it's still emerging, FDA and both also as well, Emma has been working in the last few years in developing guidelines and regulation for digital biomarker and overall they call it digital health technologies. And just about 1 year ago, actually in December 2023, the FDA published their final guidelines for fit for purpose digital health technologies. And it does cover basically a lot of areas, including the one you were mentioning, data privacy, data protection, and how basically the data should be transferred in a compliant platform, end-to-end compliant platform. But it also covers basically the selection of these devices, how it should be suitable for the clinical population. Also, it has to be well verified and validated. And also what are the risks and consideration which are important when we are considering patients.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we have 4 minutes.
I don't know if you can go ahead with the second question. Okay, I'll just quickly, just one.
Yes.
Well, okay, I have a couple. Okay, I'll just pick one of them. Regarding patient adherence and patient engagement in these medical wearable devices,
Yeah.
I know it improves, but however, at the same time, you have to ensure the patient wears it at all times, whenever he's supposed to, or he or she is supposed to. So I know that creates another problem. How do we ensure that patients always wear these devices?
Yes.
Because if it's not one, get the data. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's another good question. There's actually multiple factors to that. First of all, the design of the wearable device, has to be patient-centric. It's not bulky. It's comfortable to wear, and we've seen there's a lot of improvement over the years. Where if you compare, for example, a medical-grade wearable device from 5 years ago to today's medical-grade devices, you can see actually how the aesthetic and how the comfort has improved. Also, I think another important factor is to actually engage the patient. Typically, we in clinical trials we don't want to have biases, so usually we don't show the feedback from the device to patients. But this doesn't mean we cannot explain to the patient what we're doing and what's the importance of that. And the third element, and I think that's the most crucial, is to actually use technologies like push notification on the patient phone or the phone that the patient is using for clinical trial to send him a reminder of using these devices. And we see combining these three factors, we actually tend to get high compliance rate in wearing these devices.
Okay. Thank you. I presume my time is up. From the
Yes, I think that is right about time. Thank you. Wonderful questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Insightful
Thank you.
dialogue. We appreciate that, Dr. Sofa. Let's move to our second of third Dr. Innovators, Dr. Barbara Machado. I'll let you read her background and experiences as Dr. Machado asks her questions.
Hi, David. Hi, Dr. Elias. Thanks for
Hello.
the great contribution. It was really great presentation. In fact, you have already answered two of my questions during the presentation, which was great. I appreciate that you have made it clear the definition of biomarkers, because in the beginning, I thought biomarker would be pretty much related to genomics and that kind of thing. And you made that really clear. You made it easier for me to understand. It was quite impressive that you said that the biggest challenge would be the cost of $2.6 billion per drug, which is a huge amount of money. And you mentioned that 70% of the trials fail in phase 3, right? If
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. How much do you think that these digital biomarkers can reduce these 70% clinical trial failure?
Yeah, and actually, that's a very good question. I think there is two ways digital biomarker can help, and actually, it's more to preemptively understand whether the drug is working well already in phase 2. So typically, phase 2 studies tend to be smaller and much less costly. And relying just on in-clinic assessment may actually be deceiving because you're not actually collecting a lot of data in that short period of time. This is where actually wearable device, because it's collecting continuous data, allows you to see much more about the measure in this patient in phase 2. And it can tell you that actually the drug is not working properly. So you already can make the decision not to move to the most expensive phase 3. The other way these drugs actually can help is because you're collecting a lot of more data in shorter period of time, you actually don't need a large sample of patient in the trial, and the period of the phase 3 trial can be reduced. So already combining this less patient, shorter duration of period of a phase 3 trial actually reduce the cost overall.
Perfect. Sounds great. And it explains a lot. One thing that you have mentioned at the end was the collaboration between
Yes.
sponsors, people that produce. But honestly, my question is from the beginning, because what we see is that sometimes we call translational medicine is when you have a finding inside a university and this does not gain the market and does not gain the clinical practice. And what strategies have you found most effective in fostering collaboration between the engineers, data scientists, clinicians? Because for me, it seems that is one of the biggest challenges. See what's happening clinically speaking to what has been developed. How do you see this? To foster this collaboration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think over the years, what we've seen actually tend to be working the best is there's two type of collaboration that needs to happen. And I'm talking from the pharma perspective. Internally, within the pharma itself, within the company, we need to make sure like all the different stakeholders are aligned from the beginning. For example, clinicians, regulatory within the pharma company, data scientists, engineers. they all should be participating from the beginning, because when you talk together, each from their own perspective can tell you what's important, what's feasible, what's not feasible. But also beyond that, external collaboration is also very important, especially with regulatory. At the end of the day, for these digital biomarkers to be used as primary, secondary, they need FDA or regulatory approval like EMA or whatnot. So this is another important thing. And I think what's also very important that we're realizing more and more, digital biomarkers should not be a competition. Pharma can compete on the compound, on the drug, but I think digital biomarkers should be a pre-competitive effort, because there need to be a consensus for regulatory to approve a measure. You don't want to end up with each pharma developing their own measure specifically to them. That's not going to fly. Regulatory will not approve in silo measures.
Sounds perfect. So if you try to unify the information, it's going to be easier for the regulatory organs to approve it. That's a great
Yes.
answer for me. That's a great
Yeah.
answer for me. And as a final question, if I have any time left, you're a leader in digital health. And where do you see the future of AI and wearables heading in the next 5 to 10 years? Because it seems to me that it's gained field, space. And how do you see that, especially for drug development? How much do you think that it can really hurry? Because you know that sometimes you can take 5 up to 10 years to develop something new. How do you see that in Novo Nordisk?
Yeah. So I might not be able to talk specific of Novo Nordisk because I'm not clear to do so, but I think what I can say is generally gonna be the trend. This field right now, it actually start moving from being experimental to emerging, especially with the approval of a couple of primary endpoint like the one I mentioned. But I think the future combining AI and wearable together will have an immense potential to revolutionize how we approach health management, diagnosis, and treatment. And this, I see it in the next 5 to 10 years. For example, one particular area that I think it will see this impact is personalized medicine and predictive health, where now with wearables AI, we can drive personalization of drug development, giving the right drug, the right dose at the right time to the patient, but also in terms of continuous monitoring of the chronic disease management. And another way is to also integrating multimodal data for a holistic health view of a patient. For example, also real-time clinical decision support, where now with these wearables, we can continuously monitor in real time what's happening with the patient. So I think these are the 3 pillars that I would see would be, a big impact that AI and wearables will have on in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Dr. Elias. Fantastic presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it is fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara Machado. Thank you, Elias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elias Zeid. Now let's move to our third and final Dr. Innovator. And again, you can put your questions in the chat after our third innovator here. I'll let you read Dr. Suleiman Tunde Olorukooba's exemplary background as he asks his question. Please, Dr.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Elias, for the insightful presentation on wearables and AI in drug development. It was quite insightful. Mine is going to be quick, as some of my questions have already been addressed in the course of your presentation, as well as the question and answer session. Yeah, just like you mentioned, the wearables, the digital biomarkers, actually have more objective data collection as compared to the use of questionnaires that has some form of bias. And the issue of adherence, as I know some of these devices have to be worn on daily basis, like virtually all through. That has also been addressed. So I'm just going to tailor my question to one very important aspect to the low and middle income countries like Nigeria. It has to do with infrastructural gaps, electricity, internet access. These are things that I know these devices will need constantly. So I don't know, in areas where we have issues with electricity not being too reliable and some form of fluctuation in internet and sometimes even significant downtime in internet, are there ways in which this can be addressed in order to make the wearable technology viable in this region? Something like maybe um, uh, off-the-grid collection of data to be uploaded whenever the internet is available, something like
Yeah.
that if it's available.
Yeah, and in fact, that's an important point, and typically this is being taken into consideration, specifically in the new generation of wearable devices. Because yes, we came to conclusion a few years back that uh, sometimes the environment of these where the wearables are being used, it's actually different from the one that was sought at consumption time. And actually, the most the latest wearable devices, some of them actually are made for such environments, and this is where it's important to look at these aspects at the selection of the wearables. So a lot of these wearables actually have um, a memory on chip, so they can collect data for a month, for example, without needing to upload. And what will happen is after you can take that wearable to the clinic and they connect it to a computer with a USB cable and then download the data. And also, typically, those wearable devices are made to be very efficient in terms of power consumption. So some of it actually don't need recharging for 1 month. So again, there's a lot of these features available in some devices, and this will become important when selecting a device to keep into consideration the environment it's going to be operated in.
Oh, excellent. That's very good to know. Then lastly, I don't know, what roles should international collaborations play in order to harmonize the regulatory standards, in order to support the global scalability of these wearable devices?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And yes, I mean, um, to tell you what's this the how the environment looks like now, the two biggest regulatory players in the field has been FDA and EMA. But actually, over the last few years, we started seeing more of sort of consortiums where regulatory from the different countries are coming together to discuss. Because yes, it's an emerging field, and we need to have some standardization. Because typically, right now, what happens is if you want to develop an endpoint, you have to get approval from FDA, from EMA, and from the different countries you want to use it. And they tend to have a little bit of differences, although in general, what they require is similar, but there's still some differences. And I think it's going to be important going forward to see this unification of standards, like we're seeing, for example, now in AI standards. And we saw this act of in the European Union about AI Act, and the same in US. And I think this will become more global, and it will go towards unification, so that we have one set of standards that fit all the countries and the needs.
Oh, yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much. That'll be all.
Fabulous questions. Very important discussion. Thank you very much. Let's go to our participants. If you have, just feel free to chime in or raise your hand or put into the chat. And I was also, some things came to mind. We talked about different types of computing. There's, I was going to share something about the cloud, fog, mist, and edge here. And also I shared some about there's Starlink and Apple direct to satellite technologies. Now we have a question coming from Brazil, Dr. Leonardo Aguiar. As an innovative physician, how do you see digital therapies and wearable devices transforming patient monitoring and treatment? And what opportunities and challenges do you foresee in effectively integrating the technologies into your clinical practice? Can you share some examples of situation where the technology could bring significant value to patient care?
Yeah, I mean, I think the advantage these technology is bringing is visible and huge. So we're talking now going to continuous monitoring, real-time patient monitoring. So doctor can know exactly what's happening with the patient minute to minute. Of course, this will come with challenges. First of all, integrating with hospitals and clinic, we need the suitable infrastructure. We need to ensure also regulations. This is health data, so communication need to be secure. Data privacy should be ensured. So a lot of these need to be addressed, but I think already we're seeing more and more of these standardizations and realizations of such of systems and infrastructure, especially with the revolution with the internet and infrastructure, and also what you mentioned, for example, Starlink, that we're seeing it more and more deployed in even remote areas. So this will allow integration of this on the on a global scale.
Okay, great answer, great question. Let's move. We have one more here. Robert Yao from, I believe it's Robert Yao in Singapore, correct? Good afternoon. I was slightly late, so I'm not sure if there was discussion about clinical data. Perhaps exploring this method for data collection could be of interest. And he has a link here. Online integration of quality-focused data strategies in clinical trials.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the question. So is it about the quality of the data from?
Yeah, I think is there say about perhaps data collection? Let me see here. There's a link. Let me take a look at the link. Online integration of quality-focused data strategies into clinical workflows. Okay, on how regular clinical workflows look like in participating site and how overburdened the medical personnel. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, typically, with wearables and AI, it's basically, yes, there is a lot of data, but also there is architecture behind how this data is being collected. So one of the benefit basically is that now you're collecting data passively, which means patient is just living about their life and data is collected. They even don't notice that. And also, of course, there's not a lot for the clinician to do in that sense, because this data is transferred and it's automatically generated. So the clinician don't have to spend time looking at the data. What is the interest for the clinician is the end measures that the algorithms are generating based on this big data. I hope I answered the question, because I wasn't sure about what exactly is the point here. But I think, yeah, in terms of the infrastructure we have and the way the framework works, it's not adding burden to clinician.
Okay, we have another question coming in here. Local here in the Boston area, Dr. Kimberly O'Sullivan. I found that despite cardiac pacemakers being continuously monitoring the alerts, the alerts are delayed. Clients will be notified that the device is offline weeks later. What's being done to optimize immediacy of alerts to all parties involved, with Alto allowing for immediate response without paying for the service?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have details about this service, but I know from our clinical trials where we monitored, for example, real-time vital signs, including something related to cardiovascular, and that actually was during COVID, because it was hard to keep the patient in hospitals. Devices nowadays and their the software and the system that comes with it actually allows you to keep track of the status of the device, whether the battery is depleting or whether the device is online or offline. We're able to know that and alert the patient or send someone for intervention.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think we have further clarification. Robert had sent, I believe the data he was referring to was, he mentions from notes, things like that. I think Robert's referring to unstructured data here.
I see. Yeah. I mean, wearable data is considered unstructured data, but what I want to say is the more and more we see with the AI now, we're actually able to combine multimodality, combining both structured and unstructured data, and we're seeing really amazing results where now we're getting insights from different modalities.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to, you can either unmute or raise your hand. I've left it open, or feel free to write any questions in the chat. We're opening up now to all participants who are here. So anyone feel free. Again, we will be sharing, we have the Udly AI bot here. So we'll have the transcript, we'll have the video, we will also upload to YouTube. And we will continue the discussion after. If any questions do come to mind, please send those over to us and we'll do our best to get them answered. Dr. Ida, I see you unmuted there. Do you have a question? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, if there's no further questions, again, we'll be sharing the video, the transcript. Feel free to send your questions. Fiona's going to share a little bit here on her screen. Okay, it's up now. I just wanted to kind of give a year in review here at the end of the year from our AI Dialogue webinar series that began back in July, and just wanted to recognize our keynotes and topics here all the way through now to the end of the year, and we'll be continuing into 2025. Key features you can see here, insights from top AI experts and Dr. Innovators. Topics have included AI in healthcare, data sharing, precision medicine, surgery, women's health, chatbots, foundation models, and wearable tech. We've engaged 70 registrants and 40 participants per session, reaching thousands via LinkedIn and email. If you look at impressions, we have digital influencers, and we're across a dozen different networks. Maybe in the thousands to tens of thousands of impressions. We work globally. We have Dr. Innovators and others from all over the world. We work in the Middle East. We work in Africa, Latin America. So very global, diverse group. We welcome other Dr. Innovators. If you have friends, colleagues that would like to join us in the future, feel free. The impact here is, we're really fostering collaboration around the world. It's a knowledge exchange, those sharing their real life experiences, innovation at the intersection of AI and healthcare. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you back here in 2025 as we continue, and Fiona's sharing the various sessions we've had throughout the year. So really, thank you, everyone, for being a part of this journey. Thank you, Dr. Elias, for keynoting. Thank you, our Dr. Innovators and participants. Have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.